Morning, students. I am Dr. Lavanya Kumari, Assistant Professor in Economics, Adikavinana University. We will be going to discuss the topic Cost of Education, Determinants of Educational Costs. This is the fifth topic in Unit 1. We can complete first unit with this topic. There is a tendency to use the terms expenditure and cost interchangeable. However, the terms expenditure on education and cost of education are not the same. In general, we think that both are same, but in economics, there is a variation between expenditure and cost. Cost of education refers to the amount of money spent to acquire or impact education. In other hand, information on expenditure on education is more easily accessible and available from budgets and accounts of the institutions at the micro level and the central and state governments at the macro level. For the point of view of the individuals, costs refers to the amount of money spent during a particular period. Generally, we consider 1 year to acquire education. From the point of view of the state or the institution, it refers to the expenditure incurred on education during a year. The term cost and expenditure are used interchangeably, but more popularly, we use the term cost and refers to cost per student pertaining to a particular level, that is primary, secondary, higher secondary, or university. Similarly, cost of cost per unit to the institution or state for a particular course or level is calculated. But cost per student in the institution or state may include expenditure incurred on staff salaries, equipment and buildings, maintenance cost of apparatus, library books, sports, etc. From the point of view of the individual, cost of acquiring education includes expenditure on books and stationery, school fees, travel cost, and in case of students making use of hostels, it will also include rent of hostel accommodation, mess charges, etc. In economics, in general, the concept of cost comes into play in the production of goods or services. It needs to be noted that cost may be expressed in terms of money or in non-monetary terms. Cost affects a specific economic transactor, producer, seller, buyer, consumer, etc. Thus, when the owner of a factor of production offers that factor to a producer, the cost of the owner is represented by his consumption foregone, while the producer incurs a precise and measurable money cost made up of wages, interest, charges, etc. In business, cost is usually a monetary valuation of effort, material, resource, time, and utilities consumed, risks incurred, and opportunity foregone in production and delivery of a good or service. All expenses are costs, but not all costs are expenses. Something of value, usually an amount of money given up in exchange for something else, usually goods or services. The education sector, as the producer of the service of education, unlike any other sector of activity, theoretically brings into play the same concept of cost. This is the meaning of cost of education. A closer look at the application of the concept of cost of education, however, reveals three types of difficulty inherent in the very nature of the activity of education and raising more particularly out of below 3. First one, the definition of the production of education. Second one, the identification of the economic transactors concerned with education. The fact that education has the character of a public service. These three are more particularly very nature of the activity of education. Unit cost of education means we cost of education calculated in unit cost of education. What is the meaning of unit cost of education? We need to know. Unit cost of education means costs per unit, that is per student, per graduate, per credit, etc. Generally, unit in unit cost means the total number of learners enrolled in a course in a particular year. Sometimes it is said that the number of learners actively attending the classes should be taken for the purpose of calculation of the units cost and not the total number of learners enrolled. Alternatively, unit cost refers to the unit of output, that is successful learner or graduate. This is called effective cost of education. This type of cost calculation, education takes care of wastage in education too. The difference between the effective cost and the nominal cost of education reveals the efficiency of the given level of education system. Thus, we can calculate alternative forms of unit cost of education. Unit cost of education can can calculate by 3 as follows. Cost per learners is the one unit of cost education. It obtained total expenditure by total enrolled. Second one, cost per learner actually attend the school. It obtained from total expenditure by number of students attending classes. Number 3, cost per successful learner. It attained from total expenditure by number of pass out learners. Effective unit cost of learners also. So number 4, cost of education per capita obtained from total cap in expenditure by total production. These 4 are calculations for unit cost of education. Features of unit cost of analysis. There are some features to calculate the unit cost of analysis. 1. For manpower planning and related purposes, the effective unit cost is important. In second concept, the selection of unit in unit cost analysis depends upon the purpose, as the costs are generally found to be highly sensitive to the number of students. The student is most often considered as the unit, but while calculating costs of classroom equipment, the class forms the right unit. Generally, unit costs of education are calculated per year. It is unreasonable to calculate the unit costs for one level by the duration of a 5-year time period and for another level type of 3-year time period. These are the main features of unit cost analysis. Some are determinants in this determinants of educational costs. Knowledge of the major determinants of educational cost is essential for anyone thinking of improving the level of education in society. The cost of an educational plan or invention is often expressed in terms of its total cost to indicate the value of the total resources devoted to it. But for a diagnostic and evaluative purpose, unit cost is more meaningful. Unit cost is cost per calculation unit, that is cost per student, cost per school, cost per teacher, etc. But education has multiple outputs measured variously in terms of student achievement, number of graduates passed, and so on. Hence, while estimating unit cost, due care should be taken to avoid ambiguity. For example, cost per student may imply cost per student enroll. Second one, cost per student actually attending school, and or third one, cost per student successfully completing a given course. These are the determinants of educational costs. The problem of deciding on the unit cost has to be solved carefully. Choosing the number of students may not always be the right thing to do because all costs do not vary with the number of the students. For instance, the teachers and their salaries, the number of square meters of buildings, space, etc. Hence, cost per teacher or cost per school should also be considered. Educational cost may be divided into three categories. One, those related to the students. Two, those related to the teachers. And three, those related to buildings and equipments. In conclusion, in a normal growth rate, a composite unit including all three could be adopted. Unit costs are likely to rise due to changes in the price level, increase in learner population, rise in the educational standards, demand for education, as well as the pressure of raising the level of school going age. In making long-term forecasts, we have to take note first of the increasing in the number of students, teachers and schools, and secondly of the rise in cost per unit. It is essential to break up the expenditure on education, both by the government and private institutions, into different components like recurring expenditure and capital expenditure. A recurring expenditure or cost, as the name suggests, take place regularly at certain intervals. Capital expenditure or costs, on the other hand, are one-time investments. Cost depends on the level and structure of the teacher's salaries, the average pupil teacher ratio at each level, the non-salary costs of education, and the capital cost for buildings and other equipments. Of course, each of these factors are themselves determined by a number of other factors like availability of funds, teacher, student enrollment, etc. It is because of the variation in these factors that countries or states and districts within the country differ with regard to their educational priorities and the corresponding expenditure. With this few, I coded three references as usual. We can learn more information from these references along with library books, and which are coded in the end of the syllabus too. We can obtain more knowledge from the references. Assignment. I gave two questions. Out of this, you have to submit the assignment through mail ID. From my mail ID is alk.eco@aknu.edu.in. Within 1 week, we can submit these two questions. One question, first question, define the cost of education and unit cost of education. And second one, explain the determinants of educational costs. You can ask any questions regarding this topic through WhatsApp or mobile calls or mails. Thank you watching this video. Stay home and stay safe. You need to take precautions to COVID-19. Thank you. Thank you, Ananda.